The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me on this rather warm afternoon, where we're going to have a look at the changes to the design principle for essential skills, communication and application number qualifications in Wales. My name's Amanda Kelly. I'm the Industry Manager for Maths, English, ESOL and Employability at City and Guilds, and I'm being joined this afternoon by one of our technical advisors, Catherine. Good afternoon, Catherine.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
So I'm going to launch into this presentation. Just to warn you, my IT equipment has not enjoyed the warm weather, and I've had a couple of crashes today. So I'm going to persist and hope, I've got my fingers and my toes crossed, that it doesn't crash again in the middle of this presentation. Should the worst happen and I'm not able to get back in very quickly, what we will have to do is share the recording of this presentation with you, but we're going to make it available on the website as well. If you suffer intermittent audio issues, our advice is that you log out of GoToWebinar and rejoin the webinar, and that, for some bizarre reason, seems to do the trick usually. So let's get started. The current version of essential skills qualifications that we have, as you know, were introduced in 2016, and it's good practice for all new qualification suites to undergo a review, usually when they approach about 5 years of age, because that's considered to be a good length of time to allow the qualifications to bed in and for people to become familiar with teaching the content. And that review is a good point at which it's worth considering whether the qualifications are still fit for purpose and whether they support the learners in developing and evidencing, in this case, their skills in communication, application of number, digital literacy and employability. We have 4 awarding bodies who offer this qualification in Wales: Agora Cymru, ourselves, City and Guilds, Pearson and WJEC, and we work together to develop the qualifications and the assessments. And the title of that group is called the Asset Management Group. And we work in close proximity with Qualification Wales to ensure that these qualifications are working. And it was with QW that we started this review process. The AMG and Qualification Wales have reviewed the design principles, and these are the documents on which the Essential Skills Suite of Qualifications is based. And we took into account 3 areas that needed review. One was around improving the manageability of controlled tasks for candidates. There was also a requirement to improve the clarity of expectations for each subject at each level. And also, we took the opportunity to increase the available options for questions in the confirmatory tests. Now, as I go through this, I expect you will have questions. We've left the question box open, but what I'm going to do is continue with my delivery and come back to questions at the end. So this review took into consideration feedback from a wide range of people. We talked to centres, we talked to our external quality assurers, we talked to people who write the questions and the assessment preparation teams. And in addition to do this, we spent some considerable time analysing the data that we collect at the cross-awarding body standardisations events. And this was used to identify areas where we saw increased challenge or particular issues which were worthy of attention in the review. So Qualification Wales has confirmed that the suite in itself is still fit for purpose and is still suitable for delivery, but that they will carry out a full review of the Essential Skills suite, and that review will fall into line with the changes for the Curriculum Wales, which are planned for 2027. So the expectation is that in 2025 there will be we will start the process of a bigger review and refresh of this qualification suite. But in the meantime, it was agreed that there was the capacity at this point in time to make a number of changes. We could make these changes to communication and application of number, levels 1 to 3, with the plan of introducing those changes from this coming September 2022. For digital literacy, it was felt that there were possibly more substantial changes required, and that there wasn't sufficient time, what with COVID and the requirements for other reviews that were happening at the time, it was going to be difficult to produce those digital literacy changes in time for 2022. So the more substantial update that's happening for digital literacy will be introduced with effect from September 2023. We reviewed essential employability skills, but it was agreed generally that the design principles didn't need any changes and that there would not be any amendments to this particular suite. So let's start with essential communication skills. As you know, we've got two parts to the assessment. We have a controlled task and a confirmatory test. For communication, it was felt that there was no need to change the controlled tasks. They're still fit for purpose, and in the main, stakeholders said that they found these manageable. On the other hand, there were some areas in the confirmatory test that we felt needed some adjustment. So the range of questions required for each skill has been reviewed and broadened. And what this does is allow us to use source documents of different text types, which allows us to increase the range of questions that we ask, and also the approach that we use to asking the questions in the tests. But for communication, we haven't added or deleted any skills. So what we will be teaching will roughly be the same as we've always been teaching. Now, what I've done here is I've taken the confirmatory test specification for level 1, and I've identified in red all the items that are different, so you can see where the changes have happened. For example, it's the range of marks available for 1.2C and 1.2E has been changed from 2 to 3 marks to 1 to 3 marks. And what that did was it allowed us to only ask one question for these particular skills standards, and then ask more questions in a different area. So it gave us greater flexibility in the way the questions were asked. In C 1.3, we've amended the range of questions for 1.3D, so that instead of only ever having 2 marks available, sometimes we can have 2 or sometimes we can have 3. And then we've reduced the number of the range to 1 to 2 questions for using language which is suitable for purpose and audience. So it's not that we're changing the questions that we have, but it changes where the marks, how many questions may be asked, and where the range of marks can be applied. Now I can show you a little bit more by taking some examples. For example, in the sample paper that we've recently uploaded to the website, we originally asked a question which met criteria 1.2C, recognise the purpose of a variety of documents. And the redistribution of the mark allowances allowed us to drop this question and replace it with a question relating to grammar. So the rationale of allowing fewer questions for the purpose of documents means that we can ask for a wider range of questions in other areas. And in this case, what we've done is we've added another question, another grammar question, if you like, and we've also looked at the wording for the rubric or the question stems. So we, instead of having a best of question, we've added to the lexicon so that there are now things like there's an incorrect word on this sentence, where can it be found? So another example is that we've rewritten the question so that it covers this particular question, which asked for a suggestion, so inferring meaning that's not always explicit. And we've amended that, and we've added another grammar question here. This new way of writing grammar questions avoids the repetition of the same sort of questions over and over. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility in the way that we ask these questions. If you move to level 2, you'll see that there's again a change in the range. So where in the past for 2.2 we always asked 3 questions for 2 of these sub skills, we've extended that so we can drop down to 1 question if necessary, and that allows us to ask more questions elsewhere in the papers. And I've got some examples of how we've changed those questions on the sample. So the change in the mark distribution allows an expansion in the range for 2.2a to allow the main points question to match a number of source documents. So that's another thing that's happened, is it allows us to use different types of source documents. And we know that the style of writing questions they're generally quite a weak response from many candidates. So we've removed the question that asks for the style and tone, and we've inserted another grammar question here around appropriate conjunctions, and the candidate has to identify where a conjunction in a sentence is not appropriate. Another one is so identifying the main points. This is another area where it can be often seen as being quite a subjective question. So instead of using that, we've got more flexibility to meet the standards, and what we've got now is an even split of questions on reading and writing. So another question style here at level 2, which avoids repetition, and we're not using the same question stem repeatedly. Moving to level 3, so we've got an extension of the range for both using appropriate style and tone and using grammar correctly. And then we've reduced the number of points for lines of argument, reasoning from text and images, including by inference. And we know that inference is a challenging topic to teach, and learners do generally struggle with it. So just changing the range of marks available supports a different approach. So here we've removed the question in the sample that related to the type of language being used, and we've put more grammar questions in here. So obviously you're going to get a copy of this, or we will make a copy of this deck available so that you'll be able to read it more at your leisure. So I'm going to pause slightly for a drink. And we're going to move on to application of number. So there were a number of changes that impact on both the confirmatory test and the controlled task. So I've split these 2 up. So first I'm going to start with the confirmatory test. So again, the range of marks for each skill has been increased, which gives us greater flexibility when we're writing questions. And in addition, we've amended the wording of the standards to clarify the specification requirements for teaching and learning. So this was in response to a number of queries that we'd had from centres. So this won't have any effect on the current test expectations, but it will support you with your teaching. At level 2, we've added a new skill. So this is being tested in the confirmatory test. So solving problems involving 2D shapes and parallel lines. This skill we already covered at level 1 and level 3, but we didn't used to test it at level 2. But by including it at level 2, it allows a better coverage of the specification, and it also has that sort of progression. It smooths out the path between level 1 all the way up to level 3. And at level 3, there's another new skill. So compare distributions using measures of average and interquartile range, and estimate mean, median, and range of grouped data. So this particular skill we'll test in the controlled task, but by including it, it allowed us to include questions about statistical measure, which allows us to be more comprehensive in covering the specification. And it's also something that we heard from employers that they valued this particular skill, so they were quite comfortable with it being included. So the controlled task mark allocations have been changed in the same way as the cons. So I've got the same tables for application of number, which will help you see where the changes have been made. And some of this was around reducing the weighting for planning. So we heard a lot about the manageability of the controlled tasks, and by changing the particular weightings here, it meant that this was an area that would not need such intensive work, which would help with the manageability. Candidates won't be required to evidence a manual calculation in the controlled task, because that's now evidenced sufficiently within the confirmatory test. And it's interesting that we have a calculator and a non-calculator element now to essential application of number skills, in the same way as we have for functional skills in England, and it reflects the pattern for GCSE more. In that the one element is tested without a calculator and the other is tested with. The wording of other control task requirements has been refined in the design principles, which hasn't necessarily impacted on the current expectations, but hopefully you will find that useful when you are delivering your teaching. So controlled test task specification, and you can see the sections in red which have been clarified or amended. So I think it's fairly important to state that candidates must show in their controlled task, they must show all their workings, the values and operators that they put into a calculator, or if they're using a spreadsheet to do the calculations, what formulas they use in the spreadsheet. So they don't make an assumption, they don't just write the answer down, they show all of their workings. And that's impacted in the bullets under understanding numerical data. So the planning is more precise now. It covers exactly what they need to evidence, the information they will use, the calculations they will do, and how they will present their results. So at level 2, again, we have the same changes at the top in the main body of the specifications. Again, we've got the clarification under understanding numerical data, N2.1. Those bullets still outline exactly what needs to be done for planning. In the calculation section, N2.2, the task needs to include a formula in at least one of the 3 categories in the bullet points. So there needs to be evidence of use of a formula there. And the task must require candidates to show they've worked to the levels of accuracy required for the purpose and the context. So a description of what the level of accuracy they've used will help enhance that. Under presenting your results and findings, there's 2 bullet points here which have been clarified. Explain how the results meet the purpose of the task. So an explanation at the end, identifying the main points of the findings, as well as drawing conclusions and making comparisons and giving valid explanations. And then if we hop up to level 3, you'll see again, we've got the bullets for numerical data that relate to planning. There is no change to N3.2, but again, for interpreting and presenting findings, there's an additional bullet point. So learners must justify their choice of methods of presentation with reference to the purpose of the task. So why did they choose to display their results in that particular way? Why is that more appropriate for the purpose of the task when compared with a different method? And also at the end, the conclusion, they've got to explain the main points of their findings, which allows them to draw conclusions and make comparisons, explain how their results meet the purpose of the task, and describe how possible sources of error may have affected the results. So that's the changes to the controlled tasks. In terms of confirmatory tests, so what we've done here is we've increased the range of marks for each skill. So this information here is a repeat of the changes that I mentioned earlier. And what we have to remember at level 3 is that we are, level 2, we are testing the new skill, solving problems involving 2D shapes and parallel lines. So if we look at the specification for the confirmatory task, you can see in red in the body of the text what is actually being changed. So for level 1, under numeracy, we've got add and subtract with whole numbers and simple decimals, multiply and divide a whole number or a simple decimal by a whole number. And then we've got the new addition under work out perimeters, areas and volumes. We've got regular or irregular 2D shapes, the area of a rectangle and volume of a cuboid. Now, to be fair, you were probably already teaching this, but by being very specific in the wording, in the design principles, that supports you to know what's going to be coming up in the confirmatory test. At level 2, we've got carry out calculations involving 2 or more steps with numbers of any size. So a bit of clarification there. Fractions, decimals and percentages. We've got convert between fractions, decimals and percentages, and express one number as a fraction or a percentage of another. So that's a little more clarification there. And then we've got the new skill, solve problems involving 2D shapes and parallel lines. Now, we don't test all of these, and you can see whether the skills are covered in every single test or whether they are sampled. So they may occur in one test and not the other. So you can see the breakdown there. The other thing is a bit of clarification around numbers, fractions, decimals and percentages. So increasing or decreasing a number or quantity by a fraction or a percentage. And then finally at level 3, we've got the changes in the range of marks here. We've got a bit of clarification that says that clarifies that candidates will be required to calculate missing angles and sides in right-angled triangles. And then we've got the new skills standard, compare distributions using measures of average and interquartile range, and estimating mean, median, and a range of grouped data. Now, because that's likely to be covered in the controlled task, it will only be sampled in some papers, and there will only be 1 mark applied to that in a confirmatory test. So that was a lot of information, wasn't it? So obviously we will share this slide deck with you, and I have been recording this, so hopefully we'll be able to post a recording of this. If not, what we'll do is we'll go back and revisit it and make a recorded version of these. So I'm going to throw the floor open now and see if there are any questions. Catherine, have we got any questions?
Just one come through now. Jenny's asked how many marks will be given for the planning in the AON task now.
Good question. I don't think I've included that. I will need to check precisely, Jenny. I think it was less about the marks, but it was more clarification about how in depth the plan had to be. But thank you for that question. What we're going to do is save all of these questions and create a little FAQ document to go alongside it. But I think what I'll need to do is check with my colleagues in the asset management group who've prepared these changes to confirm exactly what the impact is in terms of the marks available. So sorry, I haven't been able to answer your question, Jenny, but I will do. I'll find the answer out for you.
There's nothing else coming through yet, but yes, it was a really good question of Jenny.
Yes, I think a lot of what we heard back from centres about the manageability of the task was that, and I think this was feedback also from our external quality assurers, was that sometimes the planning had become unwieldy, and nobody seemed to know quite what to put into the plan, so it sort of grew like Topsy and it got a bit out of control. So I think the clarification of the wording is designed to be more specific about what needed to be covered, but I think, as Jenny points out, it would be helpful to know what the implications are for actually the number of marks available. So we'll find that out. Anybody else got any questions?
Doesn't seem to be any other ones come through, Amanda.
No. Okay. Well, I think what we'll do is
one just come through now from Colin.
I just saw the big question mark appear in the bar. What have they said?
Will total number of questions in confirmatory test be fixed, and will the pass mark be the same or different, or with the relevant test, or differ with the relevant test? Sorry.
So, from what I understand, and I will confirm the answer to these questions, but the number of questions in the test is unchanged. It's just the type of question. So whereas we might have had to do 2 questions on a particular sub-skill in the past, these changes mean we only need to ask 1 question like that, and we can ask an extra question in a different skill area. So the number of questions is not likely to change, and the pass marks, because we're not changing the difficulty of the paper, the pass mark's not likely to change either.
And then we've got another one off Janine. With the new sample papers on City and Guilds website, there is an example of a plan. Is this the level that is accepted now for the planning?
So I'm going to say yes, because that was my understanding for why we put it up there. But again, I think, that I'm going to put it into writing, the answers to these questions, so that you've got some backup. So my understanding is, yes, the example of plan that we've provided gives you some indication of how much people need to do. And I think we will revisit this. Catherine and I have been talking about ways that we can further support centres delivering essential skills, to see if there is anything. So in the past, I think people have seen exemplars of controlled tasks. And people would quite like those, because it gives them an idea of what a task, that the amount of work there needs to be in a task. And we're not necessarily very keen on doing that, because they then sort of turned into a bit of cookie cutter exercise. But we are exploring how we could support you with a bit more of an idea. So maybe some examples of how a particular task might be approached. So Catherine and I are meeting to have a bit of a planning thing, aren't we? So that's one of the things that we're going to have a look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carly's just said, she popped another one in. One of the marks for level 2 asked where a learner had explained use of calculation, but nowhere on control paper where they asked for that. Sounds like that has been rectified.
Yeah.
In what you.
Yes. Okay. So yes, I think I know what this person's saying, actually, because I think there was a mark in the mark scheme, but it didn't actually ask for that in the controlled paper, and that's been amended, I think.
Yeah, and she's just added to note many learners lost this mark and the plan mark, which went to fail. So hopefully this has been explored.
Yeah, I think that's one of the very useful things that came out of the standardisation, is having a look at a range of responses across all 4 awarding organisations. Actually allowed for that interrogation of what was happening. So that combination of seeing learner responses plus feedback from centres has been very useful in this process. And I think, when we... hopefully we're both still here, but when we get to the point of the big refresh for delivery in 2027, hopefully there will be a lot of opportunity to engage providers and deliverers with that process, so that you give us an opportunity and you have your say.
That's about it now.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your questions. All of those questions were really good. So, I'll pull those off and then go in search of the relevant people to give me a definitive answer before I put it down in writing. And then we'll share that alongside this deck, so that you will be able to see what the answers actually were. I take this opportunity to say have a lovely rest of the day, and thank you for joining us today. What I'll do is leave the webinar running. Catherine and I will probably hop off and go on mute, but we'll leave the webinar running for about another 5 minutes in case you were busy typing a question and trying to get your thoughts in a row. So we'll leave the webinar running for 5 minutes or so that people can type questions in. And but we will say thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and take care.